Oh my lands. Okay, nobody's taking it. Good. Skill level. Beginner. Whatever. And we are off. What a game. What a game. A3. Okay. So A3 is a pretty common, and I'll make a move just so the game isn't abort. A3 is a pretty common move among beginners. And I'll explain sort of why I think that is afterwards. Now, as you guys know, it's not a great move, and we usually respond with E4. Now, the funny thing is it's not a terrible move either. Basically, we have E4, E5 with colors reversed, and A3 thrown in, which is not a bad, and let me just enable arrows here, which is not a terrible move by any stretch. It's actually helpful. It stops me from playing the Rai Lopez. We should play as if we were playing 1E4, right? So knight F6, and we should just develop our pieces just like we normally would, right? Now we can't play the Rai Lopez with black. We can't put our bishop on. Okay, so bishop A6 is sort of, you know, he's just moving his pieces. Now, obviously, which way should we take this bishop? Should we take it with the pawn or with the knight? Should we take it with the pawn or with the knight? Yeah, we should take it with the knight. Now, there's no point in taking it with the pawn and ruining our... Whoops, that was a mouse slip. I mouse slip taking the pawn. Now, the reason... Now, the funny thing is, we can make the most out of taking with the pawn. We can make the most out of taking with the pawn. So one of the fundamental tenets of this level is that you should care much less about pawn structure than you do about piece placement, right? So we can repurpose this and fianchetto our bishop because we have a little hole on b7, right? 100 bits, thank you. And I gotta disenable the alerts from the start. So by fianchettoing the bishop, fianchettoing means to put the bishop on the long diagonal. Okay, so he goes knight b5. He's giving up his knight to the pawn. Now we're up 2 pieces. And okay, so he goes b4. Now at this level, obviously, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. A lot of the, you know, art is just to take stuff that's hanging, and we got to be very careful about what we take. Now this is still hanging. What do we take it with? Should we take it with the bishop or with the knight? Yeah, so we should take it with the knight, just to keep the knight centralized. We could take it with the bishop also. It's not essential. It's not that important. But to remind you of one of the key themes, when you're up a lot of material, you got to not forget to develop the rest of your pieces. Okay, so he goes a4. He's playing on the flank, and he's obviously a beginner. You know, let's not. I'm not going to pretend that, you know, he's moving his pieces. He's unsure of what to do. Now a4, right? It creates, technically speaking, a point of tension on b5, but that's like we're a huge bull, and a snowflake has landed on our like toe, and to react to this is like picking up that snowflake and stopping the hunt that you're currently on. So instead of reacting to this, let's focus on what's important here, which is to develop our pieces. And what pieces haven't we developed yet? Well, we haven't developed the bishop. We haven't developed the knight. Where do we want to put this bishop? Where do we want to put this bishop? Ideally, if we could put it anywhere, what would be the ideal square for it? Well, it would be c5, right? If we could put it on c5, then it would combine with the knight to attack f2. But we can put it on c5. We just have to take this pawn first, and then we can just return to c5. Okay, so bishop a3, we can't return to c5. Instead, he offers us a trade. But in these kinds of situations, don't automatically simplify. Look around the board, see if you can find anything better. Is there anything better? All right, well, we have a knight here. We have a bishop here. They're combining. They're attacking d2. We can play bishop takes d2 check. And if he takes, then we play knight takes d2. Yeah, so again, with black, I'm playing more solidly, so we're, you know, sometimes I'll be holding myself back. Yeah, we'll get up to a reasonable level pretty quickly. So like if you're 1500, you're like, this is yan, you know. The first couple of games can be kind of dull for you, but we'll get up to a good level pretty quickly. Okay, so king e2. In these kinds of situations, there's a couple of things you look for. You look for mating patterns, obviously. You also look for ways to exploit the vulnerable king that aren't checkmate. One of them is forks. We have a knight on e4. We have a king on e2. This is like fork central, so we can knight c3, and we win the queen, and we're going to win the game. Yeah, knight takes d1. Okay, so another thing now, I know we're up like 150 pieces, but actually this is, when you're up 150 pieces, that's actually one of the best places to practice good habits. And I know it sounds weird, but the reason that is because there's no consequences to messing up, really. You're going to win the game anyway. So instead of just fooling around and making some dumb moves and, you know, trolling your opponent, it's actually a very good idea to focus on being super precise. Now, he's not taking any of our pieces back. So when you're up this many pieces and you're trying to mate the opponent as quickly as possible, one of the things that you can do is you can sacrifice back the pieces very strategically. We're up a queen and 2 pieces. We can sacrifice a minor piece back in order to shatter the defenses around his king. How can we do that? Now, I know this is like absurd. Anything wins here. Like, it literally doesn't matter. But if we were to do this properly, I would play knight takes f2. Some of you are suggesting knight e3 check. I'm doing the same thing, except I'm like taking a pawn, right? Okay, no, he's not moving. Yeah, he's taking the rook here. And this is just and now we've paved the way for queen f2. We've just done it by taking the rook. Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously this guy's a total beginner. Yeah, so queen f6 check. We can take the knight here. We can also just go up to f2. But you know, by no means, if people who are watching the speedrun are beginners, this is not meant to disparage players who are just starting to play by any means. I understand how it can look that way, but please be assured that that's not my intention. It is what it is. Okay, so, well, queen takes d4. I'm not really commenting these moves because, I mean, obviously, it's pretty straightforward at this point. Bishop e4, coming in with another check. We could also take the rook. I'm probably not finding the quickest mate. It doesn't matter. At this point, it really doesn't matter. You just got to bring your pieces in and give checks, and it's going to be mate. Queen c3 check is another check. And then queen takes c4 and queen c2 is mate. So. Okay, so I realize some people think, well, I should start at 1,000. But there will be total beginners watching on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure maybe some of you are 600-700. So I think it's worth playing these couple of games. It's not going to be more than 6-7 games like this, right? Okay, so could you try to find the fastest mate in situations like this? I think it would be helpful to see how you do it. Yeah, I mean, it's more than I don't do it any differently than you guys do. And one resource that I could recommend, if you're having trouble with basic mates, Laszlo Polgar, the father of the Polgar sisters, he issued a huge anthology of mating puzzles. I think it literally is called, I think, 5,334 mating problems or mating puzzles. You can get it, you can download it online. It's an amazing resource. It is mates in 1, 2, and 3 in great numbers. If you're serious about training, you can sit down, do 10-15 of those a day for 2 months, and you're going to greatly improve your mate-related pattern recognition. So this move like queen c2, how did you see that so fast? I didn't even see it. It just occurred to me because I've seen the pattern of the bishop-queen battery so many times. Okay. So we won't spend too long on these games, obviously, because they're pretty straightforward. He plays a3, e5, and e4. Those of you guys who started chess recently, you will know that beginners tend to push their corner pawns. I never actually knew for sure why that is the case. One of my hypotheses is that maybe when people just start, they're afraid to play in the center because they're afraid to expose their king. And you also want to get your rook out. There's something about getting your rook out early that appeals to people because it's sort of one of the more powerful pieces. So here, a3, e5, e4 is good. And of course, bishop a6, white is, just not playing well here. Now the move is knight c3. And then we would play as if it were an Italian. We could just play bishop c5 and d6. And when I say as if it were an Italian, what I mean is that with colors reversed, we have an Italian with a3 thrown in. An Italian is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. So if you compare this position to this position, I know it looks really weird, but it literally is in Italian with colors reversed. Kind of trippy. I have a story about that. I've shared the story already. So the story concerns Grandmaster Ratmir Holmov. Wait, did I already share that on stream? I think I shared that on stream, but let me share it again. Ratmir Holmov was a Soviet Grandmaster, a very strong player, actual real person, very strong player, multiple times contended for the Soviet championship. He played Mikhail Tal. He was really good. But he was a fan of imbibing during tournaments, as were many Soviet GMs. And during one such tournament, he had a long night before with Tal and other people. Tal left early, or so the story goes. Holmov stayed, and he had a long night. Then the following morning, there was a round. Holmov was black against some international master, and the master plays d4. Holmov plays the Dutch defense, and Tal is standing there watching. Holmov's like, plays f5, knight c3. Okay, that's a standard move. And Holmov plays e6, which is pretty rare. And then f takes c4, and then knight c6. And then Tal, to his horror, watches him play h6. And Tal comes up to, Ratmir, what are you doing? I'm playing the Najdorf. And then, of course, this is like the Najdorf mirror reflected to the other side of the board, which is not very good. So anyways, that was the colors reversed mirror image story that I had. The Najdorf, of course, is e4, c5, knight f3, d6. The same moves on the other side of the board, knight f6, and then a6 instead of h6. So that's, I don't know how true of a story that is. I heard that from my old coach. I don't know how the game ended. Anyways, bishop a6. So the reason I would take with the knight is not to ruin the pawn structure. I've mentioned that it's not particularly essential to keep your pawn structure intact, but that doesn't mean you have to deliberately try to ruin it either. And bishop b7, we're making the most of it. We're fianchettoing the bishop. To fianchetto the bishop means to put it on one of these four squares. That's literally the definition. If you're new to chess, you hear these words thrown around. It can be very intimidating. Fianchetto, how'd you do, Franco? I fianchettoed my bishop in the opening. I fianchettoed both of my bishops. But that's all that it means. And the reason fianchettos can be good is because this is, mathematically speaking, the longest diagonal on the chessboard, numerically. And when you put a bishop there, the bishop maximizes its utility by controlling the most number of squares. Now, piece placement is a function of two things, right? How many squares it controls and the sort of specific role that it fulfills, if you think about a graph. So a piece can be incredibly powerful and control very few squares, or it can be, very, very bad and control many squares. But those are relatively rare cases. You will find that generally speaking, the more squares a piece controls, the more active it is, the more well-placed it is, the more well-functioning it is. But obviously, if that were a one-to-one correlation, then positional chess would be as easy as 1, 2, 3, and it's not. So I'll be talking more about piece placement as we go along. Thank you, GMD. Nuts gifting to Noah. Okay, so the rest was very straightforward. We're just taking all of the free pieces. If anybody has any specific questions about what I did here, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I'm just going to slowly go through the game. But there's really not much to explain. We're just, knight takes f2 is really the only move where we're really doing something. We're destroying the protection around his king side, giving up one of our minor pieces. So knight taking the rook, getting the queen involved, taking his knight, getting the bishop involved, and then delivering the checkmate at the end. Okay. Why do you only take into account one diagonal when considering the strength of bishop placement? Well, you take into account both. You take into account both. I think you mean both diagonals the bishop controls, just that this diagonal is not very long. How to get rid of fianchettoed bishops? So one of the downsides of fianchettoing in general, right, is that let's consider the simplest fianchetto, which is like the modern defense. The problem with pushing the pawn out to g6 is that you create a hole on h6. That's the fundamental issue. And on f6, potentially, with the fianchetto, creates holes. So if the fianchettoed bishop is uprooted, then what remains are these dark square weaknesses where the bishop used to be. So there's a trade-off to fianchettoing. Also, it takes longer than just developing it normally. Why not queen f6 instead of knight f2? Well, yeah, you could play queen f6, but then he takes the knight and you haven't succeeded in using the knight effectively. Why is king f2 better than queen h4 at the end there? I mean, queen h4 is also good, but the same reason you can take the knight with his rook. And I think that how do you take advantage of the dark squares around the fianchetto bishop? So that's where the lobster pincer mate comes in. So if you watch Hikaru, you'll hear him say lobster pincer mate, or you'll hear me say that. And a lobster pincer mate generally occurs when a fianchetto bishop is uprooted or traded. So let me give you a very simple example that isn't from a real game or anything. So what can happen is, this is called a battery. A battery is it can be a queen bishop battery, queen rook battery. But it generally refers to a queen and a bishop that are stacked up in a diagonal. And in this position, white can play the move bishop h6, which essentially forces the trade of the fianchetto bishop, because you can't drop the bishop back. Well, you can, but you lose in exchange. Exchange is a rook for a bishop. And if you take, then white takes on h6. And what can end up happening is a situation like this, right? And I've played horrible moves with black. That's not the point. The point is what I'm trying to demonstrate here. This is the lobster pincer mate. It's like pincer's claws that are clamping down on the g7 square. Queen g7 mate is inevitable. Why is this even a thing? Well, it's a thing because you played g6 in order to fianchetto the bishop. So obviously, lobster pincer mate do not only occur in the event of incredibly cooperative play from the opponent. I can show you plenty of games where they occurred in grandmaster games. So, but that is one of the sort of negative externalities from fianchettoing, right? I don't want to talk too philosophically here. We'll have plenty of opportunities, guys, to discuss fianchettos and stuff. Like, don't worry about oh, this is the only time we discuss this. Yeah, so the proper play would be to leave the bishop there. The proper play would not be to help white activate his queen and get it into the attack normally. Here, the proper play would be just to develop the knight, for example.